We will expand on the conversation we've just had, and the question is simply, will your department, establish a national, publicly run and funded and owned childcare service?
Thanks very much, Deputy. And reform of the early learning and childcare sector is included in the programme for government, bringing together the best of community and private provision and the development of a new funding model to ensure an affordable, accessible, sustainable and high-quality sector. To address pressure on parents, providers and professionals, I've always said that my aim is to increase state management of the sector and also increase state investment within the sector. So an expert group was set up in September 2019 to develop a new funding model for the sector. Its terms of reference, the expert group weren't asked to propose changes to the current model of delivery, but rather that the group should seek to further achieve policy objectives of quality, affordability, accessibility and contributing to addressing disadvantage in a privately operated system through increased public funding and increased public management. In December 21, the Government approved the 25 recommendations contained in the expert group report, Partnership for the Public Good, and the recommendations were accepted in full by Government, and the implementation of the new funding model is well underway, backed by the record levels of state investment that this year will equate with €1.1 billion, and the main part of the new funding is core funding. Of the 25 recommendations, 3 are grouped under the title role of the state, and in particular, the final recommendation states, in the medium term, the Minister should mandate the Department to examine whether some element of public provision should be introduced alongside private provision. So in January of 2024, I established a new supply management unit in my department. Part of its remit, in addition to undertaking more detailed analysis of supply and demand in the sector and administering capital funding, will be to begin an exploration of public provision as called for in Recommendation 25. And work on that will commence later this year. So as I've said, in terms of the steps that I've taken, it has been about cutting costs for parents, increasing pay for staff and increasing support for providers, aware of the capacity challenges, but also we're looking to that longer public term model piece as well.
Deputy Smith.
Okay, well, I want to argue that the National Childcare Scheme is not fit for purpose. It doesn't fit the demand and it doesn't fit the need that we have in this country. And Minister, parents will come back and say to us it's the most convoluted, confusing and unfair system. And I'll just give you one instance, and picking up on a thing that comes to me regularly. Parents are penalised for wanting to spend more time with their children if children attend a school-age childcare service. If parents collect their children early on occasions, it can trigger a massively convoluted attendance rule malarkey that not only impacts on the parents in terms of reduction in subsidies and increased fees for them, but it places an onerous administrative burden on the provider of the childcare. The excellent childcare providers are getting caught up in unnecessarily elaborate policing of parents' actions, and they tell me that they really don't want to have to do this. Why is it so unwieldy, Minister, and why are so many getting out of the provision of childcare if you have this hodgepodge of difficult, convoluted malarkey that they have to deal with?
Thank you, Minister.
Well, first of all, you're incorrect to say so many childcare providers are leaving the system. We saw an increase in the number of overall provision of childcare providers last year, and we saw the lowest number leaving the service with the system in the previous 5 years. Secondly, in terms of the NCS, the number of children who benefit from the NCS has doubled in my term of office. So that doesn't suggest to me that parents are unhappy with the system. That suggests to me that parents are recognising the very significant investment that the state is putting into the system. In terms of the administrative burden that is on childcare providers, I recognise there's an administrative burden there. That's why earlier this year I set out very clearly we're putting in place an action plan to reduce admin. We're bringing in the representative group of the childcare providers, sitting them down with PUBL, with the department, and we're going to set out an action plan how we can streamline admin to make it easier, and some of those steps have already been implemented.
Minister, Deputy Smith.
Well, I'm afraid in the experience I have, and I think a lot of deputies talked about it in different ways here tonight, the mishmash of services that we have is not keeping the demand for childcare afloat sufficiently. And a lot of providers are feeling pretty desperate about the sort of administration and challenges that they face. And the reason I asked the question about the provision of a national publicly funded, publicly run childcare system is because Ireland is particularly low in terms of its overall spending on childcare. Out of the 38 OECD countries, we're number 35 down the list in terms of the amount we spend on childcare, 0.4% of GDP, while Iceland, Sweden, Norway and France spend nearly 3 times as much, as do other countries. And parents are struggling to find places, and it's not getting any easier for them. And I'd like to know, when you say that there's an increase in capacity of 3%, does that include the closure of so many little providers that existed in communities like Ballyfermot and Inchicore? There have been loads of them closing around the country. Yes, the big multiple providers are increasing their capacity, but what about the other ones that haven't to close?
Well, Deputy, I absolutely agree with you that we're not spending enough on early years, but there's a reason for that, and that's the Irish state only started to invest in childcare in 2008-2009 when the ECC scheme was first set up. Prior to that, the Irish state entirely stepped away from the early years sector. So when you compare us with Iceland and Sweden, you are comparing us with countries that have invested in this area for decades. So I accept that, and I accept the key premise of your question. But Deputy, will you recognise that in the term of office of this government, when I came into office, we were spending 638 million per year investment in this area. This year it's gone up to 1.1 billion euro. There are few areas of government spending where the graph goes up so quickly in a 4-year period. And that money has been spent cutting the cost for parents, better pay for the staff and better sustainability for the providers. There are challenges on all 3 of those areas. I don't say this area is fixed, but I do think we need to acknowledge that there's progress, and I and whoever succeeds me in this role can continue to build in that process. And to conclude, some of that may well be consideration of an element of public provision as well.
Minister, please.